The Alabama Crimson Tide taking on Tennessee is a game that we all as Crimson Tide fans look forward to. A historic rivalry that, as of recently, has kind of lost its luster with the Crimson Tide absolutely dominating the series. Alabama looks to continue the performance they put out last Saturday against Mike Leach's air raid offense in Mississippi State, and Tennessee is looking to rebound. They've had an up and down year, some things to look forward to, but going up against the Crimson Tide demands you bring your best, and we need to talk about this. Before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from you. Hop down to the comments. Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you believe that Alabama will continue to build off the performance we saw last week against Mississippi State? Let me know what you're thinking. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed this content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions, though small, are massive to content creators such as myself in getting both picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. But with all of that being said, we need to talk about this game because this historic rivalry is one that all Alabama fans, and I think all SEC fans in general, look forward to. Coming into this week, you can imagine Tennessee would love nothing more than to forget about what happened last week against Ole Miss, both on the field and what happened outside of the field. And going up against the Crimson Tide presents an entirely different challenge altogether, especially when you look at the Crimson Tide, and they are now on a warpath after taking that loss to unranked Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M is a very talented team. Let's get that understood. But that was a loss, even though we need to give respect where it is due and credit where it is due to Texas A&M. Zach Calzada had a great game. Alabama really beat themselves in that game. Missed assignments, bad tackling, and just lapses really hurt the Crimson Tide and made it to where once they were able to get back into the game, it was almost too little too late. However, fast forward a week, and you saw an entirely different Alabama squad. Last week, that squad looked hungry and excited to be out there, and that's exactly what we all wanted to see. And I think one of the more impressive things in that game last week was seeing in the first drive Mississippi State have success driving the football. And at that point, I started to wonder, like, okay, is this defense going to be able to answer, or is this just who this defense is? And luckily, the Crimson Tide defense answered after that. Mississippi State was only held to field goals, and prior to that game, Will Rogers has been putting up big numbers for Mike Leach's air raid offense, an offense that some people thought could give this Tide defense trouble. However, Josh Jobe played a great game. Jordan Battle had a phenomenal game, and we cannot talk defense without talking about Will Anderson, because Will Anderson must be in the conversation for best defensive player in college football. This young man is astounding. Last year, after his first game against Missouri, I made a video breaking it down, already highlighting his elite get-off speed just in game one, where he was a yard ahead of everybody else on the field consistently, and that speed has only increased this year. His first step is unbelievable. He has violent strength, and the way he beats you is just really something to watch. And last week, he put it all on display, notching 4 sacks in that victory, and he is really starting to make his presence felt, not only on the football field, but being a leader on this team, and that's what this Alabama team needs if we listen to Nick Saban. Nick Saban consistently said over the offseason that they were looking for a leader to emerge, and Will Anderson, only being a sophomore, is becoming a vocal leader, which bodes extremely well for the Crimson Tide and Crimson Tide fans. You get this young man back for another year, and he's already developing into the leader he is. If you listen to his press conferences, he's already adopting that mindset, and you can see why he is so successful. He's very detail-oriented. But I bring up the defense specifically for Alabama because that's going to be my first key for this game. Tennessee actually has an offense that's a bit more impressive this year than I was expecting. They rank within the top 20, and while I don't think they're a world-beating offense with anything quite to write home about, they've been effective at getting some things done, and that must be respected. You do not want to sleepwalk into this game without realizing that Tennessee has found some ways to be successful. Having that understood, though, We also need to understand where Alabama can capitalize. Tennessee has an effective rush attack. However, they have been having a time trying to stop the sacks. Against Florida, they gave up 4. Against Ole Miss, they gave up 5. And against South Carolina, they gave up 6. And they haven't faced a defender on the edge like Will Anderson yet. And even though Nick Saban gave the news that Drew Sanders isn't quite healthy yet, Dallas Turner was really, really impressive in his first game. If you have time this week before the Tennessee game, go back and watch the Mississippi State game, and that young man would post an entirely different stat line if Mississippi State tackles weren't along for the ride. I mean, I counted at least 4 or 5 times a holding call could have been called easily, and at this point, I feel like y'all know me. I'm not one to comment about calls or anything, but Dallas Turner really flashed, and they had to hold him, or else his stat line would have looked entirely different. I'm hoping that production can go forward moving into the Tennessee game. But outside of Will Anderson, outside Dallas Turner, the rest of the defensive front needs to remain stout. Tennessee has been effective rushing the ball, and they have a quarterback that's been able to move himself, which brings us to the inside linebacker position. A position group that many, including myself going into this year, thought would be an absolute strength of this team, and they have been all over the place. Both middle linebackers have had up and down performances through the entirety of this year. There have been flashes of showing exactly why so many people were really excited for this tandem, and then flashes of just head-scratching mistakes. There have been times where it's just complete busts in coverage from the middle, and those things need to be cleaned up. However, last week the performance was better. Still things to improve upon. Tackling can continue improving, gap assignment and discipline can continue improving, and communication can continue improving, but it was something that was an improvement from the week before, and hopefully that can continue into this week, especially when you're going up against a team with a quarterback that will try and get out and move. That's going to be big for the middle linebackers to stay disciplined. And what a game to do it in a rivalry game after a big-time performance last week. But what about the flip side? What about Alabama's offense against Tennessee's defense? And unfortunately, if you are Tennessee, your defense ranks as 59th in the nation going up against a very potent Alabama offense. And even though Alabama hasn't been able to run the ball as effectively and as consistently, I should say as consistently, scratch effectively, we're going to talk about that. Even though Alabama hasn't been able to run the ball as consistently as they would like, that has started to change. Last week, we saw the rushing attack come back, and Brian Robinson is an individual who I think really needs to get the ball because he's opening up things for the entire offense, and it allows Bryce Young to really capitalize on the deep shot. And now Tennessee is looking at this game, seeing that Alabama's coming off of a week where Bryce Young had a good game, but the rushing attack is looking to be solid. And if they continue that against Tennessee, Tennessee is put in a precarious situation. Because if they try and commit to stop the run, if Alabama is even able to affect them in that capacity, it's going to open up the passing game. We've seen Bryce Young just be able to influence defenses in ways that allow for his receivers to spring open as he leaves the pocket, and that could be a large factor in this game. But if Alabama's rushing attack gets going, it's over before it starts. Because if their rushing attack gets going and Alabama is able to stay in third and short, it's going to be very, very tough to stop this Crimson Tide offense with a power running back in Brian Robinson, with a mobile quarterback in Bryce Young, and with 2 talented tight ends in Cameron Latou and Jaleel Billingsley. That's just a really tough ask for any defense out there. I'm not singling out Tennessee. That's just the nature of college football right now. Look how teams are attacking, the pre-snap motion, where they're going. Alabama has talent in those areas. So that's not a situation you want to have being controlled. If you're Tennessee, you want to try and keep some agency in this game, and that's your hope, is to try and take away something. So if Tennessee can't hinder Alabama's rush attack and keep Alabama from third and short, it's going to be very hard to stop this offense, especially with the talented playmakers I named. And that's not even to get into the guys on the outside. John Mechie had himself a game last week, and Jamison Williams. I mean, at the end of the year, I would really like to look back on the transfers that occurred this year and re-rank them. We talked about that before the year started. Jamison Williams might just be the best transfer in college football right now as far as transferring from an institution and finding success in the manner he has. I mean, he has taken over with this Alabama offense and has become a really dangerous weapon within it. He and Bryce have a really strong connection, and he brings a really needed energy to this offense. Jamison Williams, when he gets a catch, when he gets a big play, he gets up and he's fired up. So I am interested in hearing from y'all. Hop down to the comments, because when we look at the factors for this game, the pass rush is going to be huge. Tennessee has not been able to stop it in any sort of consistent capacity, but outside of that, Alabama's middle linebackers must be disciplined. They have got to continue improving. They're a very talented duo. Sky is the limit for their capabilities. It just actually has to be implemented. On the flip side, I believe Alabama has a way to really affect this Tennessee defense. It's going to be very interesting to watch. But Bryce Young being mobile, mixed with the emergence of Alabama's run game, with the wide receivers really coming into their own, mixed with the two tight ends who, even though haven't had the greatest past 2 games, they're still very talented. They're still weapons that you must respect. I think if Alabama stays in third and medium, it's going to be a tough game. At the end of the day, I think Alabama easily wins this game. I think they're going to be inspired and really trying to put that loss to A&M behind them, understanding that if they continue to win out in an impressive fashion, they're going to continue improving, and that game against Georgia is going to be all the bigger. I'm very interested in hearing from y'all. Let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.